At Empower Us, we're delivering compelling conversations on nonprofit tech and fundraising. We're bringing together nonprofit leaders in the field and tech providers that are powering missions around the world. I'm really excited about this week's conversation on data optimization with Shiju Kadree, Tobias Kelly, and Justin Wheeler. So enjoy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shiju Kadree, and I'm the Chief Advocacy Officer of the New York City LGBT Center. I've been there about 5 years, and I would venture, a myriad of direct social services programming for the LGBTQ community, really of the tri-state area, though we are physically based in New York City. And in my vertical, I particularly overlead a lot of our policy and advocacy work, our government relations, government fundraising, and kind of a larger bucket I like to call external relations, which is just sort of how are we engaging and interfacing with the community? How are we trying to meet needs? What relationships and stakeholder engagement are we doing? And how is that furthering the mission of the organization? So it's nice to be here with you today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tobias Kelly. I'm the VP of Marketing and Head of Digital at UNICEF. Prior to joining UNICEF 4 years ago, I have worked across many different industries in the mobile tech, gaming tech, and ed tech spaces in global marketing functions.
Yeah, hey everyone, my name is Justin Wheeler, founder and CEO of a technology platform called Fundraise. We provide fundraising and CRM and donor management tools to nonprofit organizations all around the world. I started the company because I spent 13 years as a fundraiser. I started 2 nonprofit organizations, and in that time raised about 100 million through online campaigns, and felt like there was an opportunity to bring better technology to the nonprofit landscape. And so we work exclusively with nonprofits, and we've been doing it for over five and a half years. I also sit on the board chairman of an organization called Liberty North Korea, which I helped start back in 2007. It's an organization that helps smuggle North Korean refugees out of China into Southeast Asia to get them to freedom in South Korea. So it's a 3,000 mile long underground railroad, basically escape. And so that's what I do.
Amazing. Well, thanks everyone for sharing. And as we mentioned, the topic today is data management, best practices around supporter data management, what people could be missing, what you've seen work well, and how to assess the technology to use in that space. It's obviously a really big topic, and so I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say. I guess to start with, Tobes, in your experience as you come into the nonprofit sector, coming from a for-profit background, what have you seen contribute to the most successful data management within your organization, and what are some common pitfalls you've seen within yours or other places?
So let me start by saying, I think as a marketer, the big shift that I have seen is it's gone from being masters of advertising or masters of brand to being masters of data and strategy and ROI. And so with that in mind, the challenges that I have seen coming into such a large organization like UNICEF probably are twofold. One is multiple siloed projects, but they're using the same data, right? So then you've got to sort of duplicate the efforts and the costs associated with that data. And the other side to it is data activities that consume a ton of time and resources, but they're not actually contributing to overall business objectives. So I think I would start with asking a question: what are the business objectives? What data then is needed to meet those objectives? And then what types of insights or information is needed to make progress against where those initiatives are? So that's me, my first step. I can go into some other considerations, but maybe that's good enough to kick off, Mitch.
Yeah, that's great. I would love to. I think that's a really nice framework, and I'd love to hear, should you, within your own context of managing supporter data, like how you set up your own business goals, how you saw the data support that, and moving into the tech solutions. Maybe we can move to a specific example from your experience.
Sure. I think as a non sort of tech related person, in terms of thinking about how we are building engagement with either constituents in advocacy work, center members, center users, and also I sit on the board of Giving Tuesday, which I think most folks are familiar with. And we talk there also a lot about distributed organizing and what does that look like to have a core message, but trying to expand that and reach it to as many people as possible. And then call that data back to continue a positive feedback mechanism to improve the data that you're sharing, and sort of a nice figure 8 back and forth. How do you do that when you're trying to connect to communities most in need? So not necessarily to full-time staff, not to community leaders or stakeholders, but to your everyday person who is participating in the tech that you're offering. What we've done, one, in terms of identifying our business objectives, is actually saying, who's our target, right? And where does our target show up? Are we, in terms of like the center's advocacy work, we particularly center the needs and priorities of queer and trans people of color. Where are sort of those demographics engaging with our message? Is it social media? Is it via blogs? Is it influencers? And so that, do we need ambassadors to spread the message? Is it something as simple as texting? Is it going to be a TikTok video? Is it going to be an Instagram live? Is it going to be a Facebook page where people can communicate quietly? Is it traditional email newsletter and engagement outreach? Is it live video? Like all of the ways that we might interface. We started with one, asking folks. I think that oftentimes the data is influenced and biased by who's collecting it. And if you're not asking the question, then the data isn't getting collected. So we went straight to target communities and saying like, where are you? What do you want to hear? How does that look? What's the fastest way for you to engage? And we started first actually with a mobile base because I'm forgetting the exact statistic. It's something like 20% of emails are opened, but about 99% of text messages are. And it's hard to feign that I didn't see the text or sorry for the late response, because most of us have seen it, you just may not choose to respond. And so we decided to build a mobile database first, making a really easy text entry code and starting to collect data in that way. Then we started asking for a zip code and email and building from there to try and get a sense of who's in the database to make sure that we're actually targeting who we want to. And then what else can we be learning from that? Are we reaching folks upstate as we intended? Are we mostly getting New York City folks? Are we getting Gen Z? Are we getting millennials? Are we getting zennials? Like who's in the base? And so we've built out kind of the questions that we ask in recognition, particularly for the center, that folks don't necessarily want their identities out there. Not everyone can be out. Not everyone wants to be connected in any official or named way. And so we do a lot of anonymized data collection to make sure that community feels that they can trust us in what they're sharing, but it's in furtherance of our advocacy goals. And so we've been doing that. We built a list. We have over 12,000 folks right now. And then we do a lot of like, share this with 5 friends, and again, start the data collection over and over again. And we're starting to see pretty good reach around the state. And the way we sort of link that is by using other data networks like VAN, which is a voter access network. When we do a lot of deep voter engagement and civic engagement, we're starting to match up like who's on our list to our target areas around the state, who's still missing. And then that way we can think about like, what do folks in upstate really value? What do folks who have spotty connections in the North Country need? Maybe we're doing traditional emails there more than we are in downstate areas like Long Island and Westchester, New York City, just based on availability of tech and meeting users where they're at in order to build trustworthy relationships with the user, but also to continue to call the data in a way that is effective for our advocacy efforts.
Shiju, can I interrupt there? Sorry, Mitch. I think that the second point that you just touched on and the overall one is a real focus on audience. Mm-hmm. I think that often gets missed. And I think that is a key part to setting up a data management strategy, right? It's ultimately to help personalize the customer experience. In this case, the customer is the supporter or the donor. And the link there as well is that it does help organizations gain a competitive advantage in the market. And I think that the customer has to sit at the center of all these considerations, right? How does the customer benefit? How does their experience with the brand change positively over time? And it's actually a data management strategy can help you get there, Mitch.
And maybe Justin, I'd love to hear your perspective as the actual tech provider in this equation, where we've seen some great examples and great strategies. How do you see, what are the important considerations around your tech stack, how you get there, where you see people make mistakes? It sounds like the center did a really good job making a measured approach, figuring out what to use when, maybe just shine a light on the actual tech that makes that possible.
So I think one of the biggest things I see today in the market is it's just highly fragmented, right? So most organizations are using so many different tools. Their constituents, they don't know their constituents' engagement levels because the individual who bought a ticket to your gala or the individual who clicked on that ad on social media and then donated, those are different people because they're being managed in different platforms and systems. And so I think as organizations really start to leverage and optimize the data they're sitting on, it needs to be centralized. You need to have a source of truth. And so the tech stack you choose needs to, have native integrations with the other tools you might be using so that you have a full 360-degree view of your constituents, your donors, your supporters. This is the best way to keep them engaged, to treat them well, and so forth. So that's what I think, from a high level is important on the tech stack side.
Got it. And another thing I'd be curious, because Shiju mentioned, and hi to your friend in the background there, very cute dog. Shiju mentioned, I don't know, like 12 different avenues, right, to interact with your supporter. Do you have any like rule of thumb or best practices on when you go to which, or like, when it makes sense for an organization to try 10 different things or just one? Like, what's worked well from your experience?
Yeah, omni-channel approach to fundraising, to constituent management is absolutely key, especially today, and especially with younger supporters and constituents. I think it's less about knowing when to flip the switch and more about where people are aggregating, where the community is interacting and building, and tapping it from that perspective, right? So if you start to see a lot of support for your organization on TikTok, then it's probably time to start going to TikTok. So I think it's really dependent on where the communities are gathering and connecting. The other thing I will also say is the application of these things is really important. We've done a lot of research, and there's a lot of really great research out there on the type of information you collect and when, and how this actually hurts online fundraising, right? So if you collect a phone number on your giving form, you'll see a 30 to 40% decrease in conversion. Even though phone and text is the best way today to communicate with people, it's maybe not the best place to ask for it on the giving form. So I think understanding your audience, knowing where they congregate is important to understanding the sort of the channels you get involved with.
Yeah, Justin, I think that's absolutely fascinating that you mentioned that around the phone number on the form. At UNICEF, we have a number of different markets. And for example, the US market has data to suggest that if we do put that element of friction into the process, like asking for a telephone number, the conversion rate does reduce by 30, 40%. If you look at other markets though, Spain, UK, it actually helps commit people to this process. And we see over time, perhaps, that these people retain longer. So I think that encouraging people to test is really, really critical. And I take your point around audience centricity, like 100%. I think, again, like it comes down to understanding our audience. Mitch, there's two other things that came to mind to answer your question, which I don't think has been touched on right now. One of them is around creating strong data processes, right? Around collecting data, preparing it, storing it, analyzing it, distributing it. So I think that's really important. We've talked about technology, which I'll leave to Justin. The other part is data governance. I think that is an area to explore. I don't necessarily think perhaps now is the time. Perhaps we have a completely different conversation about this. But to flag that, especially in 2020, there is a huge requirement around governance, both internal and external, which shouldn't be missed.
Sure.
Something that you both touched on that I think is critical to lift up, though, is the accessibility of the points you're raising how do we best engage our demographic, our donors, our users with limited bandwidth and capacity. And I think what happens, the phone number sort of statistic is fascinating, right? Because I think that if an organization has a staff member that's dedicated to marketing or comms, that person is likely wearing marketing comms, maybe a little bit of operations, maybe a little bit of digital fundraising help. And they're like, we have one opportunity to capture data. So we're going to list it all here and see what we get. And if they only knew the translation, and I think Fundraise actually does this well, the translation of, if you ask on this form for the number, you might see a significant decrease in your conversion rate. They might think about it differently. But as the person who has been situated in nonprofits for many, many years, I'm very empathetic to the overwhelm of information. And especially in COVID times, everybody's like, what do we do? We have to get emails, we have to get text messages. And I think as a result, people are inundated right now. To your point around data management strategy, Tobes, and thinking about the different ways that you interface with your audience that you mentioned, Justin, people are inundated with requests, inundated with trying to figure out how to best connect to their user and their donor and their fundraising base. And I think throwing the spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. So you're going to get text messages from the same organization you're getting emails from. You might have a Facebook pop up. You go to the website, the donate here pops up. And I actually think there's a decreased user engagement overall. And I'm curious if from both of your vantage points, you're seeing that in COVID times when people are, I think, even more desperately trying to fundraise, that there's actually a sort of cognitive dissonance from the fundraiser, the audience that's being targeted. Are people stepping back from traditional fundraising platforms via text or email or the pop-ups on the website? Have you all seen any response yet?
Yeah, what I'm seeing is across our platform, our customer base, processing being up by over 200%. Bank of America came out with the state of e-commerce, and what we saw in the last 8 weeks, we saw the same level of growth that we saw in the past 10 years. So I think, it's what's happened with COVID is it's accelerated the need for digital, for nonprofits to go digital at a much faster rate than it would have. And as a result, more nonprofits are sending emails, more nonprofits are engaging with SMS as a viable channel for them. And so you're right, there is a lot of noise, but I also think it has helped organizations actually increase their overall revenue. That's what we're seeing. And the organizations who are staying on top of this are the organizations that are raising. We have a cohort of customers who decided not to email, not to raise funds or solicit during COVID. And it hurt them. They didn't raise any money because they weren't asking and they weren't carrying on. So it's been interesting to track and follow. And there has been more noise. But I think the positive has been organizations have increased their digital capacity, which I think is only a good thing as we continue to see more around that take place.
I think my perspective, Shiju, is it depends on the data. So the value that access to clean, quality data brings UNICEF, and perhaps for the purpose of this conversation, let me double click into Salesforce Marketing Cloud here, is the ability to assimilate so much data, to do it in real time, to be able to present that properly to the support or constituents, because we know that improves not only the timeliness of the ask, but also its relevancy. And so I think a lot of people would call that personalization, and that's important, right? That allows us to not pepper you across every single channel all at once, and talk to you in a much more meaningful way.
The other thing that comes to mind on that as well is during times like COVID, where we see 30% unemployment, knowing your supporter base, knowing your donor base couldn't be more important, right? Because you don't want to ask the wrong person during a time where they actually may be one of those, in that 30 percentile who's lost their job and just can't afford a gift at this time. So I think like proper data management allowed organizations during COVID to really segment their supporters, and these are the individuals we're gonna speak with, we're gonna continue to engage with and share impact, but we're not gonna ask. But this is the segment that we can ask, because we know, based off of our record keepings and based off of our data hygiene, that this is a group that we can still continue to ask. So I think that's another reason for just good, clean data management, so that you know when and how to ask during uncertain times.
I think training is absolutely key. Shiju, like I hear you that not all nonprofits are the same. Not all nonprofits have the same access to resources or people, and yet training to underscore that is so important. Like there are many free, very good training programs, and maybe Mitch, we can send you some and you can put them in the notes, the program notes that we can share afterwards, because I think to have the skills to analyze and understand data, especially today, is absolutely critical. Right? You've got to be able to make actionable decisions based on the data, because they're going to be feeding your business objectives. Whatever the size of your organization, you have to have business objectives, right? And we mentioned that right at the beginning.
I appreciate what you're both saying too, and what continues to resonate is there's the data that's being collected, and then there's knowing your audience. So not being afraid to ask the question, whether that is,
absolutely,
can I get more training? Is there a free training? Who's in the audience? How are people impacted? Who are we targeting and why? And then making a plan from that. I think that sometimes it's just overwhelming because people don't know that it's okay to ask the question. But I think all three of us are demonstrating that there are many answers if you're willing just to sort of open your mouth and try.
I'd also comment on nonprofits and access to the right tools. This is actually something we've identified as a pretty big gap in nonprofit technology. We primarily sell to like enterprise nonprofits, and there's 60, as you mentioned, 60% of nonprofits are under $1 million. So in November, we're actually launching Fundraise for free to that segment of nonprofits, where they'll have free access to the platform, data management, and so forth. And as they grow and scale, they'll grow and scale into tiers if Fundraise makes sense for them. And I think the reason why there's such mismanagement of data in the nonprofit sector today, it's not until it's too late do nonprofits start taking data seriously. And if we could come in earlier on in the startup stage, or when it's pre-scale, I think there's a lot of opportunity to really correct sort of this mismanagement behavior with data by giving access to organizations who deserve it, because we know that it's really the smaller organizations operating in the communities that are making significant impact for the dollars invested in them. And I think being able to support that type of nonprofit with more technology can help scale and lead to further impact. So we're excited about that, and I couldn't agree more with just getting technology into the hands of smaller nonprofits so that they have the right tools to scale and grow impact.
I think maybe this is a really good segue into helping our audience for this, and certainly helping small nonprofits with what questions should they be asking you, Justin, when you launch this? Because I think that actually that question is relevant to organizations the size of UNICEF as well. When we have gone through a digital transformation, we've sat with many vendors. And sometimes I sit there stumped as to what to ask, but knowing that I need to understand this more, but I don't know what questions I should be asking. I think that is a frequent fear, perhaps, amongst people who are going to be signing on the dotted line. So, question to you, what are some of the best questions that you've been asked? And by best, I sort of mean most simple, that really sort of get to the bottom of, can you help solve this problem that I have?
There's a few that stick out. One in particular that comes up quite a bit, and organizations ask often is, will your tool help us retain more donors? Right? There's a massive churn problem, and so that comes up quite a bit. I actually think that's the wrong question to ask, because I actually think the right question to ask is, what's the capacity of our donor file? What's the capacity of our donor base? And instead of trying to acquire a bunch of net new donors, is there opportunity to further develop and cultivate those in our database? And oftentimes organizations just don't know how to answer that question because they have first name, last name, an email address, and maybe an address. And so for them, like that's their data. And so what we do is, as part of our overall solution and how we can help solve this, is as part of our payment flow, we're enriching the data, and we can add about 30 different data points to a donor record upon completion of an online donation or an offline transaction as well. And what this does is this helps individuals understand, and you know, you're well aware of this, Tubbs. People who are giving online are not giving at full capacity. They have a lot more capacity to give. And so it's understanding the information like the gift capacity, normal charitable gift sizes. If you know these things, and depending on the countries you live in, this can be a little bit more delicate. This is one way to really understand your donor file capacity. And if you're trying to go from 1 million to 2 million, is it within that donor file that exists today, or do you need new donors? So I think starting there, if you're looking to scale, if you're looking to build up your organization, understanding that question is one of the most important things that can happen. And to kind of just round the question out with a practical example, when I was fundraising at Liberty in North Korea, and the reason why we built this into the tool was because of my experience at Liberty North Korea. We had a donor giving $15 a month for 3 years. So this individual was super committed, but it was $15 a month. We didn't think too much of it. We did a round of wealth scanning, and we found, wow, this individual actually has a significant amount of capacity. We should try to understand why this person cares so much about our organization. So we went and ended up meeting and had a great conversation, and that individual now gives $100,000 a year to the organization. So I think like the role data can play in helping develop the relationship, right? It doesn't mean someone will give just because they have more capacity, but it does frame the way you interact and the types of things you may talk about or ask for from individuals if you have a better understanding of their capacity to give and what their overall propensity is.
I gotta say it again, maybe it's the lawyer in me. You're just reinforcing the need to ask the question, not to make the assumptions, right? To ask, because I think many of us might look and say $15 a month, committed, that's amazing, and not think anything of it. And maybe that person's just been waiting to be engaged, right? Or doing research on the audience. So that's an awesome story. I love that.
And on that same theme, Shiju, I feel like you've probably seen a couple examples of organizations where they didn't make the right decision, right? Or they adopted a technology that they weren't happy with after the fact, but then it was such a big effort that they didn't want to change. Like, I guess if you have a perspective to further Tove's question on like, what should they have been asking, right? Or what could have helped them find the better solution for themselves? I don't know if either a specific example or just, you know, in general, what you've seen.
I think in general, it goes back to this question of what are your objectives?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people are like, I just need to raise money, which theoretically all nonprofits do. But if you can take the time to be a little bit more incisive, like what is the goal? Rather than thinking like, last year's budget was 1.5 until we want to meet that. Like, what's your reach? If you could just create the vision board for what the work is going to look like, what is your goal and who would be sitting around that table? A question I often like to ask is around headlines. You know, a year from now, we're reading whatever your local paper is. What's the headline on your organization's work? And if that is something that is going to require a completely different shift in either programming, reach, engagement, donor base, then let's work towards that rather than trying to just maintain status quo. Because what you might find, I can actually think of one nonprofit that in actually the COVID space, they'd offered physical space for folks to come in and gather. Some programming, but not a lot. They're 3 years old, so still young in terms of trying to really establish themselves. But in COVID, went all virtual. They're like, we can do virtual groups. We'll have our after school teachers who are working with the youth continue offering virtual programming in that way. And the market, because the reach expanded so vastly, they're actually generating significant revenue in a way that they didn't think before. So they've been able to hire more staff and engaging the audience and now being able to better connect with other users. They're like, what else do you need? And are looking at spinoffs of satellites now. They had only been trying to initially recreate what had been taking place. and never giving themselves to think about like, what would we want to be? How do we catapult ourselves there? And now as a result of the learnings they've already found in the last, I guess, 6 months, they've decided for the first time ever to just pause and engage in strategic planning. Because they're like, well, we were too young, we don't need a plan, we just have to stay stable. But now they're like, actually, there's a benefit to thinking about what is our goal, and as a result, engaging different audiences. And one thing I'll say just around particularly being relevant to the moment now that we're seeing with the spotlight on racial inequities and a lack of gender diversity in boards and in leadership and in how movements move, is and Justin, maybe you might have an exact stat on this, but in research that I've done, women and people of color are actually consistent givers once engaged. They may not have the highest, they might be giving you the $100,000 a year gift, but they might be the $15 a month for years and years and years. And oftentimes, understandably, nonprofits are looking for the major donor who might be able to keep the lights on or continue to allow programming to grow in a certain way. But there is significant value to cultivating a more diverse base of donors because they can positively inform and impact the work that you're doing, depending on the mission of your organization. And I often think a lot about political fundraising, where you can have like the people who totally self-fund and the reach of their campaigns versus those who are like, what's the distributed model of organizing that I can do so that I want to create an entry point for as many people into this space to cultivate as many perspectives that will inform my campaign. I think it's really similar in the nonprofit sector, and something that at the center we definitely are trying to dig in more deeply around. But again, starts with asking who's here and who do we want to be here, and how do we reach sort of the demographic that we don't see at the table but want to continue to engage.
It's a really good point. And when I was at Invisible Children, we launched a monthly giving program, and we did a lot of research around the science of giving. And what we had found was that $3 was the amount where most people just didn't think anything about. If you ask someone to give $3, they don't have to consider whether or not it's going to impact them, from a monthly expense perspective. So we launched this campaign, we called it Try, and asked everyone to give $3 a month, no more, no less. And nearly 10,000 people signed up to give $3 a month. It became over $1 million. It was several $1 million annual giving program. And it was by a bunch of high school and college students all over the country. And so could not agree more with diversifying your revenue stream. I think organizations who are top heavy on major gifts are going to have a harder time in recessions. These are the gifts that dry up. They're contingent on market activity. Whereas your lower dollar donor, these are individuals who give through recessions. Household giving went up 3% in 2008. So I think this is spot on with the way we should think about building up kind of the ground floor of our fundraising machine. It's tapping into individuals who obviously care about the cause, but can give at the rate that's comfortable for them. So I love that you brought that up, and definitely agree that strategy can be super effective.
I think there's a marketing angle to that as well, because I would admit that UNICEF has, it's a fundraising organization, but it's also, it's not just a fundraising organization. And yet we have a CTA bias towards donate. And yet there is a much bigger opportunity, I think, for all nonprofits actually, to rethink that bias and say, how can we bring in audiences of all types and persuasions and perspectives to us to get to know us first? They may give down the line, but to have them involved in our group, supporting us with the petition, supporting us with their time, with their resources, is as, if not more important. And to double click into what Shiju was saying earlier, I think what I have seen is purposely running inclusive marketing campaigns, right? Where audience is seeing ads and content that's diverse and inclusive. Like, it's content that goes beyond the wink towards diversity, but it's actually relevant. That's really driven audience growth for us at UNICEF. When we've turned the spotlight onto our diverse group of supporters, not only in the US, but globally, we've seen increases in both donation intent and loyalty, which means retention.
We're coming up on time here. So we've covered so many amazing strategies that people can implement. I think the last thing I'd love to hit on for everyone quickly is someone might view this video, especially in the Empower Us audience, and say like, okay, great. So I need staff to focus on this, or I need new tech to enable this. How do they, in a time where they're facing a likely recession, how do they bring that message to their decision makers in their organization and really hit that home on taking the action step to make it happen?
I'll start. I think it takes money to make money, right? We've heard that before, but I think we often think money is cash and disposable income. There is time and resources and investment. So I often tell my own team, do you need like 1 or 2 work days just to plan something out? Like clear your calendar during work hours, take the time to put your proposal together, and then let's talk about it. Rather than making folks do it on their own time or curate spaces on the weekends to improve their sort of traditional 9 to 5 hours for the organization they work for, let's recognize that the investment of time is a resource that most of us can give and can come back multifold. And when people know that they can actually do that during their work days, not have to sneak around, or they can do trainings during the work days, they can ask the question, they're going to be supported. If you don't actually have the cash or the additional staff that you can invest in, that is an easy way to start. And I found great success in that, in thinking not literally only from the employee engagement perspective, but in actually getting answers and innovative plans that we then usher forward depending on the program or the levels of leadership that need to be engaged. And so I would first say, just create the time to pause and figure out what you want to do. And it doesn't have to be months on end. It could just be a day, a month, where you're like, today's my, my teacher work day, sort of, where I'm planning and thinking about what I need to do. I'm going to log into the free training that Tobes mentioned. I'm going to sign up for fundraise for my organization this fall, and make sort of incremental steps there. The second thing I'll say is that there are tons of online, I'll call them sort of professional support groups, listservs, where you can just plug in and learn from those who are doing it. You can ask the question and say, hey, we're looking to engage in a new CRM. We've never done this before. Who do you all use? And using that as like thought partnership, rather than having to do the research anew and feeling like the answer isn't there. I assure you, the answer is there, and someone can point you in the right direction if you feel like you are constrained for bandwidth, staff, or actual cash, sort of cash dollars to move an initiative forward.
Yeah, so I think from a process perspective, right, and writing out what is essentially a plan, I think at each phase, you want to be able to show how adopting X can make a difference. I think the second point is finding a sponsor, a senior sponsor within the organization. Like for me, going through the Marketing Cloud adoption in the beginning, simply access to more data, better, different data that allowed us to do different things from what we'd done before. So we got quick wins, which would be my third point. And the fourth one is around measurement, right? Measure everything that you do from an incremental point of view, because you want to be able to go back to the steering committee, the SMT, whatever it is, and say, our ROI on this program is X. Our return on the investment that you gave us is Y. And when compared to the general rate of return, it's much better. So I think talking measurement, incrementality, and ROI is what is going to get you that internal support, certainly at the board level and senior management.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. And I think it starts with just sort of the way nonprofits are told they need to spend their money. And so if an organization, has $100,000 in the bank, they have to spend 90,000 of that on programs. And this is just the best way to kill the organization. And so I think, and there's different stages. I talk about this quite a bit in our podcast. There are different stages of nonprofits. And so at the startup stage, I think it's absolutely critical to invest in your infrastructure, in your team, and in your go-to-market sort of strategy that's gonna, go from helping 10 people to 1 million people. And that's gonna take time, and you have to invest in it. So I think we need to stop thinking of our organizations as nonprofits. We need to think of them as businesses, and we need to understand that really the only difference is it's a tax label to be called a nonprofit, and we don't have shareholders, we have stakeholders, and those stakeholders are the people that we're impacting. And the more people that we can impact, the better. And to do it, it usually takes more time, and it takes more investment in things that will allow you to achieve that. And so you see a massive problem. I think one of the biggest problems in the nonprofit space today is an underinvestment in marketing. I think that this is one of the most critical areas. It's how organizations maintain a reputation. It's how organizations convey their work, their impact, their efficacy. And so much of the time, marketing is what gets cut first during hard times. And so I think investing in your marketing, investing in that right talent will really help you build much more of a long-term infrastructure that's going to help sustain scale and improve impact. And so that's kind of my thoughts on that. We run into this all the time. We obviously sell to nonprofits every day. And this is a hurdle that is a huge obstacle where you can prove the growth, you can prove the return, but still the expense item is what, the decision maker sees. And so I think I love that. I love, what Tubbs mentioned about measuring sort of the impact of the thing that you adopt and being able to prove sort of that return. So I think that is important, especially in an industry where it's sometimes hard to measure. So those are my thoughts on that.
Yeah, obviously it could be a whole nother discussion area, but
yeah, it really could
hit on some high points. So I've held everyone over a few minutes. This has been amazing. I just can't thank everyone enough. So much great, valuable advice for folks, and just really appreciate it.
It was nice talking with you, Justin. Nice to see you again, Tobes.
Thanks, everyone. It was nice to meet everyone.
Cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion. Be sure to join Empower Us for more resources and one-on-one help in finding the tech solutions you need. If you have any feedback or suggestions, you can email us at info@empowerus.org. Thank you.